Okay, hello. Uh, I'm just admitting the last few people coming in. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. Hi.
Hi.
Um, I, um, I'm glad to welcome you all back to the very beginning of our Visiting Artist Speaker Series for fall 2020. We have terrific roster of visitors as we discussed last week. Um, and we're just going to jump right in. And before we do, though, I just want to remind everybody to, I think we want to save our questions till the end, but feel free to um, write questions in the chat as we go or comments. And when we come to the end of the talk, and we'll have a little bit of time for asking questions, I would like you to then enable your mic. But until then, please keep your cameras on and your mics disabled, and we'll just do our best from there. So I'm going to now begin by welcoming Erin Genia. Erin is an artist, educator, and community organizer specializing in Indigenous arts and culture. Erin has an MS in art, culture, and technology from MIT's ACT program, a sort of slightly varied but similar version of the program that I once knew. She also has an MPA in tribal governance from the Evergreen State College and studied at Institute of American Indian Arts. Erin was awarded the 2019 MIT Solve Indigenous Communities Fellowship and received her first public art commission from the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Genia's work has received attention from diverse audiences and has been exhibited internationally at the Venice Biennial, the Museum of Northwest Art, and even the International Space Station, which I would love to hear more about. Genia is a multidisciplinary Dakota artist whose practice merges cultural imperatives, pure expression, and exploration of materiality. As stated by Genia regarding one of her works, in Dakota philosophy, all things exist within a continuum of life, and the concept that we are all related extends not only to other people, but to animals, plants, minerals, electricity, air, objects, everything in existence. With this in mind, Genia asks, how can we respect the agency of the inherent life forces in everything around us? To explore such concepts, Genia creates multimedia installations of sound vessels, paintings, and video projections of her performances. In Genia's essay, Unseen Dimensions of Public Space, Disrupting Colonial Narratives, which I recommend reading the entire thing of, and the link I can provide, she extends her conversation further from her installation work to a wider cultural inquiry. Interrogating the built environment, she writes, as a creative practitioner working in the public realm, I grapple with the disconnection between narratives surrounding public space and my reality as an Indigenous Dakota artist. These narratives are founded on principles that stem from settler colonial notions of land ownership. How can people interested in public art think critically about this legacy to make work that addresses these complexities and disrupt the disparities created by it? What methods can we use to create urban areas, monuments, art, and built environments that are responsive to these issues? Tonight, we have the privilege to learn more about how Erin Genia makes work to confront these complex issues. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions after our presentation. As I said, use your hand raising function, and we'll try to keep the question and answer period organized. So let's now make sure all cameras are on, mics off, and let's welcome Erin Genia.
Thank you so much, Max. Greetings to everybody in the Department of Art community. It's really an honor to be here with you today. Wichokahe Washte. I'm a Dakota person. I'm a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, and I'm descended from the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa Indians. My pronouns are she, her, and I currently reside on the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people and within the territories of the Nipmuc and Wampanoag tribes in Medford, Massachusetts. I am currently working as an artist in residence for the city of Boston. And my work centers Dakota philosophies and amplifies the powerful presence of indigeneity on the occupied lands of America. So I just wanted to begin my talk tonight by telling you a little bit about myself. I come from a family of artists. My grandmother was an artist. My uncle is a painter. All of my aunts and uncles are artists in some way, whether that is creating star quilts or regalia, or a variety of other types of things which in the fine arts world might be categorized as craft, but to me, they're artists. My children are also artists. My son Samuel and my daughter Alexandra, they're both artists too. And so it's been really a good life to have so many artists around me. So I think what I'll do is I can begin by sharing my presentation with you now. So I'm just gonna take a second here and share my screen. I've put together some work that we can look at and then we can talk about. Okay. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so as a Dakota artist working at the intersections of science and technology, civic arts practice, and Indigenous peoples' cultural fortification, I have a really varied background that Max alluded to in the introduction. I have spent 2 decades as a community organizer, working in the areas of human rights and environmental and economic justice, as well as food justice and Indigenous people's rights. And I decided that I wanted to get a Master of Public Administration in tribal governance so that I could understand the ways in which tribal governments operate within the federal government system. I wanted to learn more about treaties and the histories of why the situation is what it is today for tribal communities. And so after having got my MPA in tribal governance, I worked professionally in the field of Native American higher education, as well as in arts and culture. And I worked for several years at the Longhouse Education and Cultural Center in Olympia, Washington. And there I worked with tribes and tribal artists to create tribally responsive programming with a goal of fostering Native arts and cultures. I have also taught at the Evergreen State College, teaching about contemporary Native arts and contemporary tribal cultural heritage issues. And it was that experience that led me to want to get a terminal art degree to sort of tie together my upbringing as an artist and my pretty much daily practice as an artist and the community and tribal work that I had been engaged with. And so I graduated last year from MIT's Art, Culture, and Technology program. And during that time, I wrote my thesis, which was about Native artists working in the public sphere. And the article, Max, that you mentioned stemmed from my thesis work. And I'm continuing to build off of the work that I had started with my thesis. And I'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. So my work is based upon Dakota cultural frameworks and research methodologies. Part of the work that I did in writing my thesis was I was faced with a problem. The academic models and research methodologies that I had available to me were not sufficient to cover Dakota culture. And so, and there's a long history of why that is, because academic institutions have, in many cases, and I think that, only now they are really beginning to come to terms and grapple with the legacy of contributing to the decimation of Native cultures and philosophies. And because of the Western cultural supremacy that I encountered, especially at a place like MIT, I realized that I needed to come up with my own research methodology. And luckily, Dakota philosophers, scholars, artists, writers have been active continuously. And so I had much to draw upon with regard to a foundation in Dakota philosophy. And so I really had developed this research model based on WoDakota, which is a Dakota framework. Basically what it is it teaches people how to act in a reciprocal and respectful way in the world. Essentially that's what it boils down to. And I applied that using a decolonization and critical race research methodologies as well, to come up with the, I guess, a hybrid research methodology. So that really is the basis for the work that I've been doing. And the reason why I have needed to do this is because of the assimilation, the U.S. assimilation policies that went hand in hand with the genocide policies against Indigenous people in this country. And so many, this reaches into so many different aspects of life for me as a Native person. I'm a product of these U.S. assimilation policies that basically have stripped my family members of our culture and forcing us to adopt American ways for survival. The year I was born, 1978, was the year that the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was ratified. So I'm really part of this first generation of Native Americans who are able to freely practice and preserve our living cultural traditions and religions. And so that's a pretty intense responsibility. It's a sacred responsibility, actually. And it often places me at odds with dominant structures and attitudes. So, that's just more about kind of like the framework and the context that my work stems from. So having said that, I really like to kind of test the boundaries of contemporary art a little bit, and from my perspective as a Native person, and with a goal of working towards cultural revitalization. And my favorite media to work in are sound, stone carving, sculpture, painting, ceramics, fiber arts, printmaking, and performance. So I do just a variety of these methods for a given piece. And I think what I'll do right now is I'll start off with this is actually my most recent and most exciting, I think, piece. It's called Chanupa Iyon, Falling Star Woman. And as Max mentioned in the beginning, this piece traveled to the International Space Station. So this piece actually has come about through many, many years of research. I have started this project several years ago when my dad gave me a piece of pipestone to carve. Pipestone is also known as Chanupa Iyon, and it's a sacred material that Dakota people use for a variety of different purposes. And you really can only quarry it in one place, which is what is today known as Pipestone National Monument in Minnesota. And so he brought me this piece of pipestone and I started carving it, and I realized that I did not have a strong background in traditional Dakota form. And I wanted to learn more about the protocols around the sacred usage of this material. You know, our family and our people have been quarrying this stone for millennia, and you know, because of the U.S. assimilation policies, I did not have that that information. So what I did was I began to travel all over the country to look at collections, museum collections, and to study the Chanupa-Ion pieces that reside in those museum collections. And so I've been to many different museums around the country and just spending time with those pieces, observing them, documenting them, drawing them, you know, being with them. And I learned so much about not only traditional Dakota forms, but also the politics of museums and how they relate to Dakota people's cultural patrimony. And so that is another aspect of my work. So anyway, that's kind of just like the background of Chanupa-Ion, the context of this work. And so this project is really interesting because it began as Sojourner 2020, which is a project of the MIT Media Lab Space Exploration Initiative. And it is a unit, which you can see there down on the bottom, that little rectangular unit. It has 3 different layers of rotating layers where capsules are inserted into the layers, and they kind of spin at different gravities. They spin at, one was just actually staying still. The other 2 were spinning at lunar and Martian rates of gravity. And so there were about 10 artist projects that were included in this experiment, I guess, that went up to the International Space Station. And it was up on the ISS for about a month. And during that time, it traveled over 4 million miles. I presented a little bit about it at the Ars Electronica Festival a few days ago. And, you know, this piece has been really important to me because it expresses what I believe is, it is essential for Indigenous practitioners to be at the table in any discussions around science, technology, and you know, now this frontier of space travel. And so what you see here in the imagery is, you can see that it's in my hand there and just how tiny it is. Anytime something goes up into space, you know, it really costs a lot of money to get it there and a lot of resources to get it there. And we had to work within a very small, you know, very limited space to create this piece. And so luckily, in my practice of working with pipestone, part of the protocols of working with the stone is that you don't waste any of it because it's sacred. So I happen to have a lot of little tiny shards, pieces that I could use to put it into the unit. And here you can see the Dragon capsule docking with the International Space Station. I'm going to move to the next slide here. And I thought I would just play a video that talks about the story behind it's a 3-minute video, the story behind Falling Star Woman. So hopefully this, can you hear this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Chanupa-Ion, Falling Star Woman. Chanpa-Ion, Falling Star Woman, will be launched into orbit on the International Space Station as part of the Sojourner 2020 project. Carved from the traditional Dakota material of Chanpa-Ion, also known as pipestone or catlinite, this tiny piece depicts the legend of a stargazing young woman who travels to space, marries a star person, and gives birth to a star child. Over time, she misses her family, friends, and her work as a plant medicine healer. She decides to leave her home in the stars and return to her people on Earth. Using the thread of her woven dress as a rope, she climbs down from the stars. However, the thread is not long enough. She lets go and tumbles down to the earth as a Wakan-Wokpa, falling star. The carving, which weighs only 0.86 grams, shows the moment she is transformed into a falling star. Chanpa-Ion is a sacred material, so this piece was prepared for its journey in orbit through ceremony. It represents a symbolic prayer for peace and for the self-determination of Indigenous people all over the globe.
Okay, thank you. I also took this video of watching the International Space Station pass overhead over our house. And this was a really amazing thing to see. And anybody can see it. You know, you can go to the website and sign up to see whenever the International Space Station passes overhead, but it's really quite large. I'll play this. You can see the kind of tiny dot there. But it's about 260 miles above the Earth in orbit. And the piece, Chanpa-Ion, spent that entire month floating in microgravity as the International Space Station orbits the Earth once every 90 minutes. Okay, so another work that I've been engaged with recently, and it has had many different iterations, is a project called Sound Vessels. And sound vessels are essentially ceramic sculptures that transmit sound. And the sound is a material just in the same way that the clay and the glaze are materials in the pieces. The process for creating the sound vessels involves first listening and then recording different ambient sounds or playing instruments or speaking either spoken word pieces or Dakota language. And then I create different sound compositions that are then played through the pieces themselves with the surface transducer. And you can see here on the upper right-hand side, this is the brain of the sound vessels unit. This is what you see here in the larger picture is an installation of sound vessels at the Urbano project. And for this iteration of the sound vessels, I wanted to experiment with hiding the brain. In other iterations, the brain has been out there, you know, as part of the piece, but I thought that I would try it this time by putting the brain inside. And it added a bit of air of mystery, I guess, to the piece. But essentially, each of these different sculptures that you see here are transmitting a different channel of sound, and all of the timings are different. And so it basically is a random orchestration of various different sounds. And I've got a couple of examples here. This piece that you see down here in the on the lower right-hand side is what one of the sound vessels looks like. So after I've created the sound composition, I then try to figure out what kind of amplification shape the sound composition should have. And then I build that in the clay. And so this one here was built to project a sound of a cicada. And I don't have that sample of the sound with me, but I will often go and do some recording in, you know, out in the woods or, you know, by the water or something like that. So I like to include bugs and frogs and stuff. So I'll see if I can play well, I just wanted to add another follow-up to that last slide there. Let's go back. That the sound that you heard at the end of that sound clip is the sound of an avalanche and a explosion. And some of these pieces here are they're forms that are created to show strip mining operations in the earth. So you can see kind of one right up here in the lower right-hand side. I created those because I wanted to sort of have a way to think about the technology that we use that creates, you know, the copper wires and the motherboards and the minerals that come out of the earth that contribute to these technologies that we use. And so that's why I decided to put some sounds of that destruction, you know, into this sound piece. So Earthling is Earthling is something that I have a lot of fun with. It's a character, it's a person, it's a being, it's both playful and unnerving. So I really first started to do Earthling as a way to just kind of freak people out in public. And so I made this mask here, and I have the outfit, and I would just walk around in public places like that. I mean, there is a deeper reason to this, but I think, you know, also on a personal level, it was a way for me to like sort of express some frustration with this sort of dichotomy, I guess I feel, of being a Dakota person in a very like Western society that I am a product of too. So there's like a irony there, but so what I was really trying to express with Earthling is this, you know, Dakota concept that Max read and brought up at the beginning, that this philosophy, Mitakuye Oyasi, which means we are all related. And that translates into basically that everything is alive. Everything in the universe is part of a giant life force, and that we respect that life force for what it is, and we have built our society on that understanding. You know, like, I feel like Western science is kind of slowly coming around to that understanding, but for us, that is something that interconnectedness is something that we have always known. And so to me, that's just such a powerful gift of this legacy of Dakota philosophy. And drawing from that, I created Earthling to show that human beings are not separate from the earth. Essentially, that we are the earth, that we're, you know, we're not even like a product, well, we are a product of the earth, but we are the earth itself, just as in the way that cells in our body are a part of us, you know, they are us, we are the earth. And so we have, you know, that that kind of like responsibility to this kind of larger thing. And so let's see here. So I recently did this live performance of Earthling that I just wanted to show you 30 seconds of, if I could. I couldn't embed it into the thing. But basically, like, Earthling is master of the mundane. So anything that a person does, Earthling does too. And this is just a short clip of the performance that I did, the Earthling live performance. So I just want to make sure that that we're still on time here. So this next piece that you're looking at here, you know, I work with sound, and I've started to think of like the drum as something that I have been raised around ever since I was a little girl. And thinking about the vibrations produced by a drum, this piece, Acoustic Teepee, is basically a device that amplifies those drum sounds and expresses this Dakota story of the Wakion and the Unktehi, which are basically supernatural creatures that are they represent the power of storms and the power of water and flooding. And so really this story is a way to discuss, for me, climate change using, you know, Dakota characters, Dakota elements to talk about climate change. And this piece that you see here, I mean, the location of where it is at the Venice Biennale at the Lithuania Pavilion. And it's an interesting piece because people can sort of gather around this piece at one time and play the drum. So here's just a short clip. so Acoustic Teepee is a piece that I specifically wanted to place in the Venice Lagoon as a ground zero site for climate change and as a way to sort of amplify these vibrations that, you know, because each beat of the drum is a prayer and a communication to those beings, those sacred beings. So let's see here. And I think I'll try to go a little bit faster now because I just want to make sure we have enough time. This is, I've been playing a lot recently with light itself and playing around with the colors of light. And in my previous years, I worked a lot more with pigments and as a painter. And then I became very interested in the qualities of the light itself in terms of the colors that are transmitted. And I created this Morningstar Light Chamber, which is a projection device that can be programmed to project different colors on the RGB spectrum, and it rotates and it can project at a different angle. So it's kind of like a fun thing to use at a party, I guess. Not that I'll be having a party anytime soon, but here you can see some of the colors, you know, that are projected through the Morningstar Light Chamber. Okay, and then I also work in textiles as well in Fiber Arts. And this piece is called Invisible. And I made this piece as a way basically to create a symbolic skin of protection for myself against pervasive cultural supremacy. The Morningstar form is an expression of Dakota cultural power. And here I'm using it to transform white cultural supremacy, which expropriates and erases other cultures, into a protective, you know, skin. And so this particular piece is also, I guess, a performative piece as well. This, I recently, you know, I've been working a lot with this image of it's called Ampa Owichafbi, this morning star. And it is a visual representation of many, many things in Dakota culture. I won't go into what those things are, but there's a lot going on with this image. And so for this piece, what you see here is what is called Counting Coup. I took this fourth world flag and I placed it on the balcony in Building 7 of MIT as a way to, Counting Coup is a Dakota warfare method where you basically tap your enemy on the shoulder. You don't kill them, but I wanted to do this because being at the institution, I felt that my beliefs were in some ways belittled or not taken seriously. And I knew that there's a long history of that, not just at MIT, but I think in academic institutions in general. And the fourth world flag, there's a quote that by George Manuel, who is he was the World Council of Indigenous Peoples president in the 1970s. And he said, he defined the fourth world. The fourth world is the name given to Indigenous peoples descended from a country's Aboriginal population and who today are completely or partly deprived of their right to their own territories and its riches. The peoples of the fourth world have only limited influence or none at all in the national state to which they belong. So I created this Morningstar form using many colors of the rainbow to show the great diversity of Native people, of Indigenous people as well, because I also feel that, you know, there's many, many tribes and every tribe has its own culture and its own language and its own particular histories and relationships to each other. and relationships to the colonizing powers around it. So that's what this flag represents. I just want to make sure that we're okay on time. How much time do you think we can continue for?
Yeah, see, we started a little bit late. So, you know, just feel free to, I want to make sure that you cover what you want. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Great. Okay, so this piece here is called After Powhatan's Robe. And I wonder if, is anyone knowledgeable or have seen Powhatan's Mantle? It's a historic piece. I made this piece in Salzburg. I was doing a residency, and my studio space was in a fortress on top of a hill, Hohensalzburg Fortress. And I had the chance while I was there to visit a cabinet of curiosity, like one of the original cabinets of curiosity from hundreds of years ago was, still there in a palace down below. And it really got me to thinking about the legacy of these cabinets of curiosity, these Wunderkammer. As a Native person, in many cases, these cabinets of curiosity have housed some of our, items of patrimony and our cultural items. And the way that, I don't know, how much you know about these cabinets of curiosity, but essentially what they are is a way to classify and display different things. So things are classified animal, mineral, vegetable, and man-made. And so within these cabinets, royal and wealthy people in Europe would have explorers go out and collect different things, and then they would keep these things in these cabinets. And a very kind of colonial way to look at the world. And so as I started to do some research on these Wunderkammer and looking at them as a precursor to modern day museums, I came across this amazing piece called Powhatan's Mantle. And it turns out that this piece actually was in the first public museum ever, the Ashmolean Museum, which opened in 1683 in Oxford, England. And it came through this collection called the Tradescant Collection, which was basically a cabinet of curiosity to one of the kings at the time. And this piece is just so beautiful. It is, it's an intricately beaded hide using shells called Roanoke shells. And it has said to have been owned by the sachem there called Wahonsaka. And, I've never actually seen the piece in person, but just from pictures alone, I could kind of sense how amazing this piece was. And I just was overcome by this feeling of sadness that the culture that created that piece, had been decimated by colonization, and just feeling overwhelmed by that sort of kind of same mentality, honestly, that was used to deprive people of their lands, lives, and cultural properties in some ways still continues to this day. I wanted to really think critically about that in terms of the context of these museum collections that really stem from this tradition of the cabinets of curiosity. It was upsetting to learn that a piece of such cultural significance ended up, in a museum as an oddity, a specimen, prize, which has really set the tone, I think, for how museums interact with Native people and our cultural and art pieces, are basically our masterpieces. So I created this piece here. Initially, I tried to reconstruct it, and there was just no way. I mean, the thing is just absolutely amazing. There's no way I could do it. So I created this spiral of shells to show that, you know, even though this has happened to our people, you know, we are still continuing. And the shells are spaced out to show that, like in the original piece of Powhatan's mantle, the shells are all together, and there's many, many of the shells in the spiral. It's a very tight spiral, and this one is very loose and spread out. So that's what this piece is. It's a reflection on that legacy. So then I, you know, have really in recent years also started to think more about my work as occupying public space, because feeling, you know, somewhat closed in by this museum construct. And then starting to think about how public spaces can be much more accessible to people. And so I really have been aiming to do more work lately in public space. And so as a result of that, I created this piece here that was exhibited as a temporary piece at the Seattle Center for a year. And it's called Ampa Owichakpi Dakota Pride Banner. And I created this piece because in the 1960s, the United States government created this program called Indian urbanization, or urban relocation. And basically what that meant for Native people living in on reservations was that they were encouraged to leave the reservation and go live in the cities. And so now, you know, there's, as a result of that, many urban Native people. And that's how, you know, my family ended up in New York because of that. And so I created this piece because, you know, there's many of us in cities, and yet we very rarely see imagery that speaks to our culture, that comes from our culture. And so I wanted to put something, you know, in the space that would enliven this space, and also, you know, pay homage, I guess, to the many urban Native people living there. So yeah, so I thought I would share this information too. So, you know, as a result of working in public space, I've been thinking a lot about what does that mean? What is public space on occupied lands? What does that mean in a settler colonial context? You know, this sort of public and private binary of ownership, excuse me. So as a result of that, I'm organizing this conference with the New England Foundation of the Arts that is happening next week. And if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the NEFA website and look up Centering Justice. Basically what it is artists, Native artists from a variety of different art media forms coming together to talk about these different issues that you see here in the sessions. And I don't want to take up too much time talking about this, but this is part of my work as well. I do a lot of organizing in my community, and I always feel that my work, you know, is part of my practice to work with other Native artists, and my work, working in the studio is what it is, but it's enhanced when I can work with others, and when, you know, other people have opportunities to speak as well. And that is part of that. So I'm currently, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I am currently an artist in residence for the city of Boston. And I've been working with the Department of Emergency Management. It's a very interesting model what they do. They embed an artist in a city office, and the artist then rethinks things and creates works that respond to, you know, whatever might be happening. So earlier this year, as a result of COVID-19, the mayor of Boston declared racism to be a public health emergency, because it was such a huge disparity of people of color contracting and suffering from COVID-19 than white people and affluent people. And so, you know, and then at that time, the Black Lives Matter movement was happening, and, you know, monuments that had been in question for many, many years and started to come down all over the world. And, you know, in this vein of thinking about public space and public monuments, and living in Boston, which is a place that seriously loves its colonial history, I wanted to interrogate that a bit. And, you know, Native people in this place are very invisibilized, and I would even say hyper marginalized because of this colonial history, you know. And like walking down the street, you see these monuments that are pretty offensive. And so I put together this panel of speakers, Native leaders, artists, and allies to talk about these issues. And I'll just play the little clip. It's like a trailer, which you can go to the website and look at all of them. There's like 4.5 hours of talking. If you have time, you can look at that. But this is just a clip of, you know, some of the highlights.
Living in these colonial cities, in my experience, I am choking, suffering, like on visual representation that demands that I don't exist.
How do you see monuments and memorials in the public sphere contributing to the public health emergency of racism and affecting the day-to-day lives of Indigenous people in your communities? What work are you doing to combat this or to draw attention to this?
Things are so covered up here, and it has an impact in when we go out and we're trying to talk to non-Native people about things and trying to link our struggles together. And the reason is because so many people in this state actually think that we're extinct.
All the way down the walkway was nothing but monuments honoring these colonizers, and you know, they're towering over you. Seeing the letters being kind of carved into the stone, it's like, by having to endure that and then also to be erased simultaneously.
When we're looking at public spaces, what is the reverence that is evoked from that? What, when we are walking the pathways of our ancestors, where are those spots that evoke, my goodness, you know, I need to leave an offering here?
And for us, what it is very important, it is to uncover what it is the history and the networks that actually make possible those monuments and those names to happen, that actually make possible to perpetuate the normalization of white supremacy.
Perhaps space needs to be made in our society to think of Indigenous art as well as having that same sort of weight and importance, both ideologically and materially.
When we're talking about monuments, change, representation, where are the Indigenous people? Many of us are tending to historical trauma. Many of us are just trying to survive.
The monument about Christopher Columbus is not about the past. When we put up a monument, it's about the present. So to be really clear, when we're thinking about what monuments we're putting up, is what are we saying about ourselves? What are we presenting about ourselves? What do we want the world to see about ourselves?
Okay. And that's everything that I have for you today. I'm going to stop screen sharing.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks so much for your talk. really enjoyed learning a little bit more about your work. I'm gonna give our group here the opportunity to talk directly to you. I just had one kind of very broad question, maybe to start off as people are gathering their thoughts. You answered a little bit of my question in the end there, but I'm just always very interested in when artists are working on public projects or projects that take place outside of conventional spaces for the reception of art. What kind of opportunities you have for feedback from your various publics, because your work speaks on so many channels especially, but in general, I think it's always an interesting kind of conundrum. So what kinds of ways can you get a sense of the response to your work from these publics? And then what ways do you have the opportunity to respond to those things, that things are, become not just a fixed object in a traditional public artwork vein, a formal thing in a space, but actually something that's, as you're pointing out, very alive and very, not like a conclusion, but more an inquiry.
Yes, thank you. I guess I would just start off by saying that it's really messy. Working in the public realm is very difficult. Everybody brings their own experiences, their own opinions, and their own cultural backgrounds and ideologies to this space. And, very rarely do people ever agree. And so I guess I feel that that's a good thing, because if these things are coming up for people, that if issues are coming up that people don't agree on, then the piece gives them an opportunity to talk about that, and it gives them the chance to maybe either change their mind or understand it a little bit differently from someone else's perspective, or maybe not change their mind, maybe be more solid in their understanding. And so while it's hard, though, I have to say it is really hard to be sort of at that nexus. Like, it takes a toll, but it's also very exciting too. And then in terms of feedback, I think with the piece that I made, the Dakota Pride banner, I got a lot of really good feedback on that. But I think, people kind of have to go out of their way to give you the feedback if they like it. And so if they don't like it, or if they don't care about it, then you're just maybe not going to hear from them unless they really hate it. But it did get torn down a couple of times too. So I don't know if that was also sometimes because these public pieces, they're taking up, they're in people take their public space personally, that's their space. So if it's offensive, or if it's something that they don't agree with, maybe, then they can physically do something about that. So I don't know if maybe that was either an indictment on the piece, or was it they just were playing around? I don't know, who knows? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Before I kind of follow up, and I don't want to take over, I want to give everyone else the opportunity. I see that we've had a lot of activity, and it's maybe the easiest way to do it is to see if it works to just ask you to speak up. There are some questions I saw along the way, of some ranging from technical questions about materials to things that were more broad than that. So maybe we'll just try that. Feel free to open your mic and take the chance to ask your question.
I have a question. So I think the stepping out in the Earthling costume, for me, is very brave. So props to you. That's awesome. Do you feel like your artwork has always been kind of bold and brave, or was there a switch from it being more of an introverted, just for me artwork, to being more of the movement that you're trying to make it?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think it was more introverted. when I was earlier in my practice. I didn't have the confidence yet. But, you know, after years of doing it, I guess it's kind of like, well, what do I have to lose? Plus, nobody can see my face when I have the costume on. So it's like, it almost is like freeing in a way. You know, I don't feel so embarrassed because it's, as far as anyone knows, like, who is that? So yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Who wants to read one?
I guess since you referenced the academy and like some of the difficulties with the paradigms that the academy presents, like it's also interesting to me that you went to Evergreen. My brother went there, so I know that's a very important school that kind of looks at education in a critical way. So I guess maybe I'm wondering, maybe just like what's your art practice in relationship to different institutions?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great point. And I think I have a very healthy distrust because of the way that education has been used as a tool of genocide, with starting with the boarding school system against Dakota people. And, you know, so that is just so deeply embedded in my understanding of the education system in general that I bring a healthy distrust with me. You know, and at the same time, like I think I struggled a lot when I was in art school too. When I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts, I struggled because I felt maybe constricted. But then, you know, I realized that what a gift it was to have that space, you know, in this sort of capitalistic society that we're in. When you have the space and time to put in energy into really developing your own ideas, your own things that are so deep within you, you know, if you have a channel to bring those out and to make that constructive, that's a gift. And, you know, you may have to interact with these systems that can be very oppressive, but as long as you bring that sort of criticalness to it, and questioning of it, I think that, you know, that's a way to get through it. And I still bring that distrust with me. You know, I think that speaking this truth as I understand it is also something that you can do in the academy as well. And maybe you can't necessarily do that in other circles, other arenas. So.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else who has a question, something in mind?
I do have something in mind. I think it's so brave, like your art is representing a culture that is not being seen. What would be your, I don't know if you have an end goal or what could be ideal for you to see your culture to come together, or like just to reach out to others and maybe you guys can, you know, be together again, or like what would be the end goal?
Thank you. That's a great question. I don't think there is an end goal. I think that I see it in a continuum of what is my responsibility to my culture and how can I use the tools and resources at my disposal to help, you know, to make things better for my people, for my culture, which has been so, you know, it basically really needs a lot of work. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I don't know what all that work is. All I know is that I have a small part in that, and that I, you know, when I consider my role in that continuum, you know, I think to myself, well, what I have kids, you know, and I think, you know, what about their kids and what about their kids and stuff like that. So when I see it in that continuum, you know, I just feel like I must do my part.
Yes. Yeah, it's an important part. It's part of your essence, and it's like finding yourself in a culture that you haven't been or seen for a long time. So it is amazing for others that are like immigrants and that we lose ourselves. So it's pretty awesome to see what you're into.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. So I can tell you're very personal with what you're doing. Your artwork is very reminiscent of you and your spirit. Do you ever try to stray towards that and not have a identity piece? And if you do, what do you do? Because I'm very similar. I also really like to do my culture pieces and pieces that really identify with me and about change, but I have a hard time with trying to stray away from that. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, my process is wide ranging. And so what you see here right now is sort of like the end of that process. And much of that just also begins with pure expression. You know, like I go in there with my materials into my studio right here behind me, and I just do whatever comes out. And then, you know, that begins to form into something else. So I think that's a part of the process. And then eventually, you know, it turns into this thing that does include those other aspects. I think that I try to do it that way because I want it to have some relevance. But there's a lot of pieces that I make that don't have any relevance, and that they're just stuff that I made, and maybe it's bad, or maybe it's, you know, just maybe it doesn't, not bad or good, it's just a thing. And that's interesting too, I guess.
While we're waiting for the next question, I have a kind of more detail-oriented question, just like a technical question, but relates to this idea of articulations in different ways in different media. I really like those amplification shapes in the pieces, the sound vessel pieces, I think you refer to them as. And I was just curious how, like what the processes you use to determine those shapes. Is that subjective, or are you looking like at some kind of acoustical kind of software that determines them, and then you make a kind of translation into that material?
Well, I do use software to produce the sound pieces themselves. And I think, you know, whenever I use the software, I can see the waves of the sound visualized. And that does help me when I, you know, am working with the clay. But when I'm working with the clay and listening to the pieces, it really is more of an organic moment of trying to figure out how that sound would best be amplified through a shape, through a form. You know, what thickness does that clay wall have to be? What curvature needs to be in a certain place or not? So I guess it's more of an organic process, which is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, you know, like, so it's very much one of the things I really like about the sound vessels is that it's a test. Every iteration of that project is a test. I learned something from the last one, and now I'm going to try this. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. No, I love the relationship between, you know, a sonic work, something that is a kind of ephemera, and then kind of capturing this kind of form that you intuit, that it both has a form and eludes that form at the same time. Thank you. I think we have a little more time. How are you feeling? We have time for any more questions or
Yeah, no, I love it.
comments? Those of you out there, come on, I know that there are some comments in the,
I got one, I think.
yeah, okay.
It's more of like a specific question, I guess, because I was really drawn to the acoustic teepee. Not only was the design on the physical material just beautiful, but I really was like taken back by all the symbolism held within it. And I was sort of wondering if you ever considered expanding on that more, maybe making more of the pieces so you get a multitude of sound, or can more than one person play on the drums at a time? I'm not sure if that's, you know, a practice in which there's only one person doing it. I would love to know more about it, basically.
Yeah, thank you. I actually had thought when I initially did the project that acoustic teepee would be a part of a circle of acoustic teepees, because a teepee is a home, and it's a home. Acoustic teepee is a home for those vibrations, and the way that those teepees are set up is they're usually set up in kind of like a huge area in a circle. And so I thought, that would be a really cool public art piece, that there would be like a circle of teepees and each one had a different thing that they did. So maybe a project for the future. But multiple people, like up to 4 people, can play acoustic teepee at one time, because all of the drums are different sizes, and they have different tones that come out of the drums. So when 4 people are actually playing that's like when it's maxed out. That's the it sounds really cool when 4 people are playing it.
Cool. I'll definitely be looking for that in the future.
Thanks.
I think there's a question from first David and Monroy Berganza, and then from Beatrice. David? Do you have your mic activated, David?
I can't hear.
David, if you look into your mic, see if you can figure that out. We'll come back to you, and maybe Beatrice, maybe you have a question.
Hello. Thank you for speaking and being here with everyone tonight. I was just wondering, because you were talking about how you had a lot of artists in your family and that you work closely with other Native artists, like more in the present. So I was wondering if you have or had any Native artists that were inspirational to you, or if you were mainly influenced by your family, or if was there a turning point that made you want to pursue art more seriously?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'll start with the first one first, with the last question first.
Sorry.
A turning point that actually, yes, and it did involve other Native artists. I was, working as an arts administrator, and I had my practice on the side, and I was working at the Longhouse and helping other Native artists, like with technical assistance, and we did grant programs and residencies and all of these things. So I got to know a lot of people working. I work in the Pacific Northwest, which I encourage everyone to study the Native art of the Pacific Northwest, because it's just like mind-bogglingly amazing. The carvings and the performance, and just there's so much about the artwork there that is like incredibly inspiring. I would say that was an influence, but then I was invited to participate in an international Indigenous artists gathering of the Pacific Rim. And I went to New Zealand and there were about 100 Native artists there from all over the world. And it was just like this incredible moment of being like, I need to stop everything that I'm doing and just like focus on art now. So at that time I was like, in 5 years, I want to be a professional artist, and I want to transition away from, you know, the more administrative stuff, which I do think is important, and I do think that that had helped me as an artist. But you know, to have space and time to do your practice is not easy in this world. You know, like a lot of times you have to have a job or have another thing to sustain that. But at that stage, I was basically just like, I need to figure out a way, you know, to do this, because I was just so inspired by so many living artists that I was working with at that time. And there's a ton of amazing Native artists that are practicing now that I'm inspired by. I did an internship at the National Museum of the American Indian in DC, and I learned more about contemporary Native artists there as well. I mean, I just encourage everyone to look at what's happening with Native artists. There's just some really interesting things happening. I'd say Indigenous artists across the world. Really cool stuff.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's another question I'm waiting to receive by writing here because there's a mic problem. In the meantime, is there anyone else? Would like to speak up?
I have one question. Regarding your piece after Powhatan's robe. I saw in the chat, I stepped off briefly, you use animal hide for the canvas material here?
I actually know the piece itself is made from animal hide.
Okay.
You know, the ancestral piece. But but mine was just basically, I found an old curtain and used that.
Okay, I was wondering how much like found objects bleed into your work? Like, is that an important aspect?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So, you know, I often get this question from folks, like wanting to know about traditional materials versus contemporary materials. And I think that this is related to your question. And when I was working in the Pacific Northwest there, a basket weaver by the name of Hazel Peet was a very influential woman. And she passed away, and her daughters carried on her legacy of teaching basket weaving. And so I was friends with them. And so I learned about her, what she did. And one of the things she said was, we have always used what is available to us, and today we have the world. And so that's the answer that I give when somebody asks a question like, you know, about sort of like, you know, would as a Native artist, do you use more like traditional kind of materials, and what is that? What does that mean? But I basically use what is available to me, you know, and sometimes I'll have an affinity with some objects within my vicinity, and I'll just use those. And I actually started to use some found objects with the sound vessels more recently as well, just thinking about how these regular objects, like old pieces of recycling and stuff like that, would reverberate, how they would project sound.
And in this piece, the robe piece, those are shells on top?
They're actually clay. I made them out of clay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I didn't have access to shells, so I just used clay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So there's a question here. I could read it, or maybe, oh yes, I should read it to you. This is coming from David Monroy Berganza. As someone who is an immigrant from Guatemala and of indigenous blood, seeing the cultural differences and the teachings from there and over here have been really interesting. In the public schooling in Guatemala, some of the first subjects taught about Native culture. I'm sorry, I'm trying to paraphrase this as well. Some of the first subjects that are taught are about Native culture, whereas here they teach about people, discoverers like Christopher Columbus. I agree that he should not be praised as he should be. We should discuss more about Native history. I do believe it's an important part of American history as a whole. How do you believe that we should expose young Americans to that darker side of our history, and when should that happen?
Thank you, David. That's a very interesting thing to think about. I mean, I guess the problem here in the United States, from my perspective, is that there's sort of a mythology that is taught from the time a child goes into their first classes. And I've dealt with that. You know, I've got multiple children and they've gone through the system. My oldest son is 19 now, so he's, you know, gone through the whole thing almost. And from the time that they enter school, these mythologies begin. And I think that we really need to have an honest conversation about our colonial past and what that means. I think that we can't really move forward without being honest about this history and what, you know, how it has impacted our situation today, like with what we're seeing with institutionalized racism having such a horrible effect on people's ability to survive and thrive. And, you know, economic disparities and just through the roof, you know, and climate change as a result of colonial mentality. You know, these things have an impact in how they play out in the world. So I guess it's not so much as of when we need to begin, which, you know, I think we do need to begin as soon as children can understand things, but it's what are we teaching and why is how I see it, I guess. Does that help? Does that kind of answer the question a bit? I think that's kind of like a really large question and would take a really long time to consider that and think that one through. Great, thank you.
There's a question from Tyler Leno. Do you want to ask your question, or would you like me to? Or, oh, I think it's visible. Yeah, you can see. Erin, you can see that question, right?
Oh yeah. Why do you think we as human beings identify so much with our cultural heritage? Throughout history, people have identified themselves within a group of their own and mostly rejected their individuality. Well, I guess I would say to that I can think about that from my perspective as a Dakota person. Our people have been able to survive and thrive for thousands of years because of the cultural teachings of our ancestors. And because we've been able to survive that way, it makes sense that we would identify with those things. You know, I guess maybe at the heart of your question is this idea of individuality versus collectivism, which is a topic that is very often, you know, living at a centralized point in this discussion about Western systems and non-Western systems, because the individual has such an important place in Western philosophy, and sort of the hierarchies that come with individuality. So I think there's a lot to unpack there, you know, within the premise of that. And I guess I would just say that it really, from my perspective, you know, that's how we survived. We survived the apocalypse of colonization by adhering to our cultural values. And so that's not nothing, you know, that's significant.
Erin, thank you very much for your talk and for being so generous with your time and answering our questions. I know there are more, but maybe that's if that seems like a good place to end tonight. Or I also want to thank you for inaugurating our fall series this year. So, and you all have been, it's been great to have all of the participants here. So again, we're really pleased to have you.
Thank you so much, Max. And thank you to everybody for being here. I wish you all of the best in your artistic endeavors. And it's really just been an honor. Please reach out if there's anything that I can do in the future for you.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing more of your work out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.